In light of the EV fire in Sydney this week, I thought rather than just talking about the fact a car set on fire in a car park and not talking about the fact that 20 times the amount of petrol and diesel cars are involved in fires, I thought I'll take the opportunity to gather some really quality information and dampen down the hype a little bit around EV fires, because the reality is very different from what you might think. So even if you're a fellow car person, so you're like me, you follow the news, I think you'll be quite pleasantly surprised with this video. So some EV fires happen randomly, and in comparison to a petrol or diesel car, you can see that a petrol or diesel car probably wouldn't just set on fire whilst being parked, like EVs can do very rarely. So this fact alone makes EVs very easy to ridicule, like a sitting duck, and use kind of as a cash cow for the mainstream media looking to simply just get your click, get your time. So the nature of EV fires versus cars with a tank of flammable liquid underneath is just different. It's the nature of them that's different, not the quantity. And that's what's so captivating for the mainstream media and also the controversy. So the issue is complex, and it isn't simply a matter of numbers. How many EV fires relative to the total number of EVs on the road is in a given place? It's more than that. This is a part of it, but the numbers simply don't stack up and definitely falsely represent the truth. So it's a misrepresentation of the truth. That, I think, is the heart of this video. So for those of you that are new here, thank you very much for tuning in to today's video, which is serving kind of as a video to try and end or dampen, like I said earlier, this myth about electric vehicles being, always on fire. So my name is Ben Alexander, and I make videos every day about EV news. So if you're here watching this video, then you'll probably like my other videos. So please consider subscribing to show YouTube that people are interested in my videos. And also YouTube will show you my stuff, in the future. So I'm very keen to know what you think afterwards. Everyone who's watching this video, please take a second to write your thoughts in the comments. I always try to use highly evidenced or fact-checked data, and it has got to be from a credible place, a credible source. Otherwise, I'm just operating the same as the mainstream media, taking quotes and taking it out of context. That's not my bag. That's not my thing. So it's a big part of what I do with my videos. I try to make sure it's all highly evidenced, fact-checked. I spend a lot of my time back and forth emailing companies and trying to call them incessantly, just so I'm a little bit different to other places that give information out there. So today I decided, out of all the places I could choose to, quote some data, I chose Sweden. So we need to talk about how the numbers are a misrepresentation of the truth in the context of EV fires. This is a situation whereby the numbers alone simply don't work. Sadly, I like numbers, I always talk about them, but they don't work in this situation on their own. And we need to talk about the other things around the numbers. So we need to offer clarity on the overall situation with EV fires globally. So let's actually step back out of this little bubble and take a global look at what is going on here. So the rise of EVs, electric cars, electric vehicles, has brought with it a slew of misconceptions, many of which are perpetuated by the mainstream media. One of the most persistent myths is that EVs are more prone to fires than their petrol or diesel counterparts. I will say this, with regards to EVs, almost all incidents with fires are e-bikes and scooters. Almost all of them. Almost all of them. It's shocking. They're not looked over, or when they're brought into the country, there's no accountability for if something's just crappily made. Electric cars, on the other hand, there are definitely rigorous checks, and they've got to pass a lot of stringent safety measures. So that's why we don't really see EV cars having fires very often. A closer look at the data and the inherent design of EVs paints a really different picture. Contrary to popular belief, electric vehicles are significantly less likely to catch fire than petrol and diesel cars. Data So I chose Swedish data from the Civil Contingencies Agency in Sweden, that is called the MSB, revealed that in 2022, last year, only 23 fires were reported in electric vehicles out of the whole year, making up a mere 0.004% of Sweden's electric vehicles, which is a total of 611,000 vehicles. So they had 23 fires out of 23 fires involving EVs. Not necessarily the batteries at fault here, they just happened to have a battery involved. They're not confirmed battery fires. So in stark contrast, there were 3,400 fires reported from Sweden's 4.4 million petrol and diesel cars, representing 0.08% of the fossil car fleet in Sweden. So this means that a petrol or diesel car in Sweden was around 20 times more likely to catch fire than in an electric vehicle, which is pretty shocking, I think. This isn't supposed to be very political. I apologize if it does come across as a bit political, what I'll say in a second, but it's really not. It's just to, just try and offer a bit of clarity on why I'm choosing Swedish data here. I'm highlighting how good Swedish data is. Don't think that because this specific data I'm referencing isn't from the UK, US, or other countries that are very big and powerful and known to be kind of superpowers on the world stage, it's not less valuable because it's from Sweden. It's really, really good data from there. And also Denmark too. Sweden have always been very open about their data, very, very liberal with it, which is really, really good. An example, I chose their data because, for example, in the pandemic, naming no names here, but being deceptive with data and then welcoming your citizens with the military with weapons and forcibly guarding them with your guns and shoving them into rooms for 2 weeks is inappropriate. In Sweden, they literally had the data that everyone else had in the world, all the other countries had in the world, and they just gave it to citizens of Sweden and said, you decide what risk factor you are. We can advise you a little bit, but we're not going to force you to do things. They respected human rights and didn't hoard the data and keep it a secret like other places did. They didn't dictate where you can or can't go. It's incredibly transparent as a country and known to be one of the least corrupted countries in the world, highly regarded as being very accurate and proficient with gathering and distributing its data. Very, very clear with their data they are. I have so much respect for that. So is Denmark, probably more so, ironically, but it's just a bit harder to get the data from Denmark, so I didn't bother using it. Much quicker and better than the UK, for example, which is generally very, very good, but still, I'm just using Swedish data because I just need to really give the best data. This is why I chose to share numbers from Sweden. Swedish data is the least likely to be wrong or corrupted in some way, and I must point out, though, that global data from all over the world pretty much says the same thing, actually. I just wanted you to have the actual numbers from Sweden because it's less likely to be problematic if you're going to quote it to anybody. So the Australian data says the same as that too. 10 million EVs delivered last year globally around the world, EVs. Now we've got over 30 million EVs being driven around the world, and less than 400 of those have been involved in a fire caused by the battery. These are known as verified battery fires. So I think it's like 394 or 396. This is the bit that separates EVs from vehicles that drive around with liquid under the seats, the battery. That's the bit that matters here, not the fact that a car is on fire and it happens to be fueled by a battery. It was the battery the cause of the fire. That is actually the important thing here. So a huge amount of cars set on fire all over the world, pretty much every manufacturer. And if you don't believe me, Google it. Even all the biggest and the best, and the most common causes for vehicle fires are car accidents, electric wiring failures. So car accidents, electric wiring failures, fuel system leaks, overheating engines, overheating catalytic converters, which is a strange one. I didn't expect to see that in the data. We have likely all seen some of the huge amounts of videos on YouTube whereby a sports car, a supercar revs up, and then a fire erupts from around the exhaust area because it's just so intensely hot and it's too close to glue or plastic, basically. Glue or plastic. These are some of the common things that get too hot and set on fire. So one of my cars over the years was a Honda Jazz, and I remember that the petrol tank was actually in this car under the front seats instead of the back seats, which is it is on usual cars. And the pipe that runs from the filler cap run all the way into the car and surprisingly close to the exhaust actually. And I had noticed that it was dripping on a joint, actually just dripping a flammable liquid all over the floor. That's a good example of how dangerous they can be. This is where the difference is in EV fires. This is where it really shows. What makes them look as though they're like a ticking time bomb is that they can kind of set on fire sometimes whilst sitting idle or whilst charging. Seemingly, it would be, it wants to get you, basically. It's a bit weird when a car just isn't being touched and it sets on fire. That's a very weird thing. So it really plays into the hands of the mainstream media, I think. This, I think, tied with the fact that they can't be put out, only thwarted slightly and managed safely by covering a vehicle in a large, specially made fire blanket, means that they are insanely easy to make the argument look so real that EVs are burning up all over the place when they literally aren't. So we are also, you have to remember, at a time of great controversy, where the population is somewhat divided, especially in Australia. The people that don't like EVs or just want to use an engine can really get off on these EV fires and don't see the point of changing a system that has to a degree been finessed. So yes, petrol and diesel engines vehicles are so much better than they used to be, but it is technology of the past. It's Victorian technology with pistons, cranks, conrods, valves, and we're squirting oil in there and it explodes. And then the stuff that comes out the back, people can breathe, and that's the second leading cause of cancer in Australia, is that stuff that comes out of diesels, for example. So the battery can cause a fire inside a cell of the battery. This is a bit of a tricky thing that people don't really understand, because it can actually create a short inside the cell chemistry itself. Most people don't know this. When the transfer of materials inside the chemistry bridges the gap between the anode and the cathode, this is one way that they can spontaneously start a fire and start an exothermic reaction. So therefore it's like a heat runaway event. The transfer of materials inside a battery on the anode and cathode is referred to as dendrite formation. Dendrites are tiny little bits of material, like needle-like growths, that can form on the anode or cathode of a battery, especially in lithium-ion chemistry batteries. These growths can actually extend through the electrolyte in between and potentially reach the opposite electrode. And if dendrites bridge the gap between the anode and cathode, then they can create a short circuit within the battery chemistry itself. This short circuit can lead to overheating or reduced battery life. That's fine. Not the end of the world. But sometimes, very, very, very rarely, it actually causes so much heat that it causes the fire to start, because it causes a thermal runaway event, basically. So dendrite formation is a significant challenge in battery technology, if not one of the most severe ones that we need to really completely eradicate, or very, very close to, which I think we're already kind of there now, but we want it to go completely, especially for rechargeable batteries. Over time, as a battery is charged and discharged repeatedly, the risk of dendrite formation increases because it's just building up and building up, kind of like a clogging artery. Researchers are actively working on solutions to prevent or minimize dendrite growth to improve the safety and longevity of batteries. For example, LFP batteries are very good in dealing with this concern, and also the new CATL or CATL batteries. They recently came out with a chemistry which was very, very good at this. One of the big selling points, actually, and also it was very dense in energy. I think of it like the points on an old car. If you had an old car, like I had an old Beetle once, an old classic Beetle. I'll put some pictures up to show you now. I once changed the points for the spark, and the transfer of material was really severe on one half of the point where it goes. It had half of it had just left that side and just sat itself on the other side. And that I think is a good way to think of this, I reckon. In conclusion, all cars can cause fires at any time. It's mostly petrol or diesel cars though. However, if a petrol or diesel car starts fire, within minutes, the fire brigade can literally arrive and end it. Just huge amounts of water, end it within minutes. And also they can use foam as well and other things. There isn't something to photograph that looks dramatic for very long when a petrol or diesel fire starts. And also there's no need to photograph a random petrol or diesel car like a Ford Focus or a Toyota Corolla. It's not part of a current controversy as EVs are. The media have no reason to want to post that on the front page or put it on a thumbnail because it's uninteresting, because it would be happening way too often. So I think subconsciously, when people register a story of an EV that's set on fire, when they read the news, it also subconsciously highlights a lack of stories for petrol or diesel vehicles on fire. And therefore, EVs are seemingly more dangerous. And for example, when was the last time that you read a random article for a petrol or diesel car on fire? It's splashed around in the same way that EVs are. Yet we know there are lots more, thousands. But in reality, the spotlight, the light is being shone pretty much entirely on EVs, especially in that sort of regard. Anything bad, anything they can get their hands on to, get your attention, to show you adverts, So anytime one crashes, anytime it's involved in anything at all, it will get talked about. That's just the nature of the beast here. So I understand there are concerns, for example, petrol or diesel cars generally don't randomly set on fire while parked in a garage at home or in the car park at the bottom of a hotel. This is a bit of a tricky thing we should really try and get on top of in the future. So how do we now start parking our EVs that potentially might combust under our house in the garage where our kids and family are in the house asleep at night, or in a hotel underground car park, if they might start a fire that you can't put out and only thwart for 10 or 20 minutes? Fortunately, this is not likely to ever happen. But what if it does? That's the question, I think, that people really want to have answered and just nailed. They want to nail that like a coffin. And as EVs are so heavily checked by the authorities to be super safe to sell, for example, in Australia or the UK, for example, we won't need to think about that for very long at all. I mean, we don't really need to think about it now. That's how good they are. They're super safe. So I hope this video was a bit interesting to you. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. It's really appreciated that you chose to watch all the way to the end. And for those of you that support my work on Patreon or YouTube memberships, or buy me a coffee as well, thank you so much. It is touching and it really helps me get through the month and survive and pay the bills, actually. So remember to press the like button and feel free to share this video with anybody that has doubts about EV fire safety. Also, this is Mimi. He's actually the neighbour's cat. I've said this before. Some of you have met him in some of my previous videos. He's a couple of years old, really cool tabby cat. He really likes to come in, and when I sit and do my work, he comes in from the neighbour's house and just sits with me. So I always stroke him and let him sleep in here while I do my work, especially here in Brisbane as well. It's quite hot in summer, so he wants to get out of the sun, out of the heat, so he just sits there. It's really nice. So he's Mimi.